recording. So you can start, Alain.
Okay. So just I wanted to also ask Christophe, what does he do, and does he work with Cloud Paks, or what is his knowledge around Cloud Paks in general, etc.?
So I have not a lot of knowledge about Cloud Pak. So I'm Christophe Laou, working for Soprasteria as a cloud architect. And I don't have a lot of knowledge about IBM Cloud Pak, but I want to pass the certification.
Okay, good. So just to give you a heads up, this certification one is a hard one. But I provide material that would most probably, if you dig into it thoroughly, you will be able to pass the certification. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to start my presentation. I have a lot of slides. It's very verbose, and it would be very boring, but please stay focused. If you have questions, you can ask me your questions at any time. At the end of my presentation, I'm going to share with you my deck, so there's no problem having access. You don't need to make screen captures or whatever. Don't lose your time with that. So how do I stop this? Okay, so I launch my presentation. So okay, it's going to work because I'm on a shared drive. Okay, so you have my name, you have my email address. You can contact me whenever. Oops, well, I don't know why it's going forward in this way. Okay, so you can contact me through my email or through LinkedIn. If you want to contact me through LinkedIn, you can find my name on LinkedIn, and there's no problem. I'll be more than happy if I can provide help, assistance, and answer to any questions. I'm part of a team which name is Hybrid Cloud Build Team. I have a European role, so that's why I'm here, even though I'm based in France. Well, everybody is based somewhere, but my job covers Europe and EMEA, more precisely. I did this presentation to business partners in IBM France, in France, for IBM business partners in France once. So basically, Cloud Paks, if you're not familiar with, you know that OpenShift, Red Hat is an IBM company, and OpenShift is the product which we build our stack, middleware or software stack on. Okay, so OpenShift could be installed everywhere, almost everywhere, on bare cloud machines, on virtual machines, on any cloud, on any type of infrastructure, almost any type of infrastructure. It could be on AWS, Azure, Google, IBM Cloud for sure. And so Cloud Paks are, let's say, they are IBM middleware packaged in silos by affinity, by, let's say, software family or middleware family. And they're grouped together in order to propose a set of functionalities to the customers, to the end users. So we had 6 Cloud Paks since last year. There has been a great revolution in packaging and making software on top of Cloud Paks. So right now, I think we have 4 or 5, I don't know, and some merge together, some merge into OpenShift platform, and some really got, let's say, repackaged, and they have new things inside. So IBM Cloud Pak for multi-cloud management actually is one of those who has changed a lot. I'm presenting to you the tips for certification, administrator certification version 2.2. We had a version 1.3 administrator and solution architect. The administrator version is deprecated. The 1.3 if it is not deprecated, it is too old and out of the scope. The one is left is IBM Certified Administrator Cloud Platform Multi-Cloud Management version 2.2. Version 2.3 GA'd last month, I guess, and at the end of the year, and now the Cloud Pack that would remain would not be named as Cloud Pack for Multi-Cloud Management, but there's a new Cloud Pack, which name is Cloud Pack for Watson AI Ops. So it brings, it will merge what is inside Cloud Pack for Multi-Cloud Management, and on top of that, it will bring all the very trendy and sexy AI ops features that every editor, everybody is talking about. Okay, so predictive action taking on top of an infrastructure by using AI, etc. So that's what the future of Cloud Pack for Multi-Cloud Management would be. But till the end of this year, this packaging will exist, and the support also will continue for Cloud Pack for Multi-Cloud Management, I guess, for 1 or 2 years, because that's something that we are obliged to do for our customers. So there's a bit of future for this thing that we are going to go through together. So as I mentioned, Cloud Packs are middleware which is containerized in order to be able to be deployed on top of, and I don't like when there are typos. Okay, yep. And so there are containerized software put together, packaged together in order to bring a bunch of functionalities. Okay, so Cloud Pack for Multi-Cloud Management, as you see here, the infrastructure is any cloud or any infrastructure. Then you have this virtualization layer, which if you're going on a virtual machine or if you're going on Kubernetes environments. And then on top of that, you have the Cloud Pack by itself, which brings different bricks or different components, which are put together in order to bring a functionality that we can use in some parts of it or all parts of it, regarding what we want to achieve for a customer or inside a company regarding the needs. So you keep in mind that there's a part which regards the platform, and the other part is the components by themselves, and which do the actual management job for us. Okay, so is that clear until here? If you have any questions, don't be shy. It's only 4 of us. Ask me any questions. You'll have the deck at the end, so don't worry about that. So ask your questions if it's not clear, if I'm saying things which seems nonsense or ununderstandable. So again, a big schema of high-level schema of Cloud Pack is that you have the container platform, you have the automation platform, and you have the control plane platform. Now, Cloud Pack for Multi-Cloud Management has something inside, or had something inside, which was the core multi-cloud management, which was called the core multi-cloud management, which is a component in order to manage clusters, cluster environments only. Cloud Pack for Multi-Cloud Management manage all sort of infrastructure, virtual machines, clusters, etc. But there was a party inside which name was Core MCM, Core Multi-Cloud Management. This Core Multi-Cloud Management was targeted to manage clusters only, OpenShift or Kubernetes clusters. Okay. This core component was handed over to Red Hat. Okay, so stick with me, bear with me. This was handed over to Red Hat so that they integrated it into their platform, and the name became Red Hat Advanced Cluster Management, RHACM, 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 as we call it, or Red Hat Advanced Cluster Management. And the reason was that every other competitor of Red Hat had such a tooling, and Red Hat didn't want this kind of tooling. So Rancher, Azure, EKS, AKS, etc. They had some sort of tooling which did this. So we handed over this component to Red Hat. However, the core MCM still remains inside the Cloud Pak for multi-cloud management as well. So you have an overlap if you install OpenShift and then you install MCM. You can either have the RHACM doing just cluster management on top of Red Hat OpenShift, or you can have it inside the Cloud Pak for multi-cloud management as the MCM core. Okay, so it's complicated, but just take it as it is. So Cloud Pak for multi-cloud management, as we call it, CP for MCM, CP for the number, and then MCM, as we call it in abbreviation, brings four grand silos of functionality. It brings visibility across hybrid environments. It brings ITOps, automation and transformation. It brings application modernization and management, and governance and compliance. Okay, so if you have never ever touched multi-cloud CP for MCM, with CP for MCM you can manage your clusters through dashboards, all the clusters across all clouds that you have. You can manage your hybrid applications. It means that you can provision applications on top of clusters and on top of virtual machines and manage the lifecycle of the applications. It means that you can bring automation through tools such as Terraform and Ansible. And it means that you can, to all those platforms that you manage through this Cloud Pak for multi-cloud management, you can apply policies. So, for instance, if you need that all your infrastructure or parts of it, or parts of your customers' infrastructure be compliant for, I don't know, for any reasons, HIPAA compliant, I don't know, financial compliance, or any other internal or rule-based or policy-based compliance, you can manage these policies and rules from one single point of management, which is included in CP for MCM. So that's why it is a very interesting Cloud Pak, and it helps a lot when you have a multi-tenant or sophisticated environment to manage, either for your clients or for yourselves. So now let's jump into the certification. The certification is if you have if you have ever passed any certification, professional certification for IBM products or for other products, you go to a site which is, in this case, is Pearson VUE. You pay either 240 US dollars, or you have a voucher which is provided to you by your company or by IBM. And you have 90 minutes to review 62 questions, and you must have at least 41 right answers in order to pass the questions, okay? And I provide to you links to the course and certification overviews, okay? And you have different sections in this exam that you're going to take. So in the exam, I don't know if you're familiar with or not, in the exam it's not written this question regards the installation, this question is in regards of configuration, etc. You have different questions which are in disorder. You can have a question regarding the installation, then you can have a question regarding security, and the third question could be regarding, again, installation or configuration or whatever, okay? So, but these sections that you see gives you a high-level knowledge of how questions are planned and what you should study. So there are 9 sections. 9 sections, yes. Each of them has more or less the same weight for 10%, 11%, etc. So monitoring is 13% because it's important. Planning and selection is very important as well. The others are important, but they have less weight. And you have the subsections, which are which says understand the use of common web UI, etc., etc., etc. For instance, okay. So these are the modules that you should go through. And there is an official document, a PDF, which is an official helper in order to study. But actually, that helper is not a great help because it gives you links. So you click on the links and you go to the Knowledge Center of Cloud Pak for Multi-Cloud Management, and you should read a web page. Okay, so it's, if you don't have hands-on practice, it's a bit difficult to know what you're doing. Okay, so I put some resources links here. You have Cloud Pak for Multi-Cloud Management Knowledge Center, and it's categorized by version. So when you go to that site, you can be sure that you're in the version 2.2 because there are previous versions and there's the 2.3 version, which is out of scope, which all are out of scope for us today. Then you have
Alain, a question.
Yes.
Does it exist a training environment when we have hand-ons?
No.
On the infrastructure? No?
No.
Okay.
You can build one on your own if you want to, but that means you do provision an Kubernetes, an OpenShift cluster, and you provision either on IBM Cloud or on an infrastructure, a Cloud Pak for Multi-Cloud Manager.
Okay.
But unfortunately, that's why I say it's a bit hard, because it's really a sort of admin test, so you should know manipulate stuff. But
Okay.
don't worry, if you read my document thoroughly, I guess you can find answers. And I'm not saying
perfect.
more than that. Then you have links to Cloud Pak Foundation and also other components such as IBM Cloud Event Manager, etc. There are some intermediate badges which are available. So if you do the learning and you pass the badge, you can probably have a better idea of what you're going to be certified for and have a, let's say, more precise idea around the questions. On the IBM Certification Professional site, you have a sample test and study guide. So the study guide is the PDF with lots of links. And you have a sample test, which is around 10 questions, okay? And you can try to answer those questions. The answers are provided at the end of the document. It's a small PDF, 2 or 3 pages. And then you know where you're situated. Otherwise, there is also on the Pearson VUE certification site, there is an assessment test that you can take. It's made with around 62 questions as well. It takes the same time, 90 minutes. There is no certification at the end. It's just a test, blind test for you. So you can have a better idea of what the questions would look like. But if you succeed, or if you're successful, or if you fail the assessment, it's just a measure for you. There's no glory or no shame at the end of it. Okay. And these questions which are in the assessment would not be repeated in the actual exam. If you pass the exam and you're successful, then you have your certification, official certification, you have your badge. If you pass your certification and you're unsuccessful, you can again challenge it and you'll have a new set of questions. if you fail twice, I think you should wait. I think you should wait 30 days in order to be able to re-challenge the exam again. And the reason is that you've seen both number of questions that they have provided for the test, and maybe you are intelligent enough to go and look for the answers referring to those questions you have in your mind. So that's the reason, the philosophical reason behind the time lapse that you should spend before challenging again this certification. So the study guide looks like this, and to be honest, it's sometimes shitty because some links are broken, because I don't know when they made maybe a Word document and they printed a PDF. Some links are broken, so you probably need sometimes to copy and paste the links and correct them by your own on your own in order to achieve the right page. Okay, so don't be surprised if you see that some links which are broken, and you have I think 30 pages like this, 30 pages of links and links and links and links. Okay, so now I'm going to jump in each section and talking to you like hell and describing things that you might not know, but bear with me, stay with me, look at what is on the screen, and you're going to have this PowerPoint at the end, and you will probably be able to pass the exam. So the Cloud Pack for Multicloud Management targets personas in an enterprise. So developer, operation guy, IT admin, SRE, and security and compliance engineer. And each of those guys has certain tasks to accomplish or to manage, and they have, let's say, targeted operations to do. So you should study. I mean, it's important to know what persona does what, and what is he meant to do, and what he should do, and what are the resources that are at his disposal. Okay. Again, this is the following, because I couldn't put everything in the same page. So you've got links either on the when I made these slides, I put links either in the notes of the page or through the direct images that I put, or through the text. Okay, so there are lots of links on these pages. So again, for instance, a site reliability engineer has these tasks to do in his day-to-day life, and what is he can do and achieve through Cloud Pack for Multicloud Manager, and there are references to what he can do, or what he has at his disposal. When you go through the study guide, keep in mind the architecture of the solution. Okay, so you have the infrastructure, you have the cloud native or traditional workloads, and then you have all the operations. Okay, so each time, try to imagine each time you're in studying something where it fits. Is it about application lifecycle management? Is it about automation? Is it about data operations, etc.? Okay, so this is something that would probably help you to visualize in a 3D dimension where the question should fit and what it is talking about. Then you have to also keep in mind the deployment architecture which is proposed. So basically how you are provisioning the platform, or how the question is, what the question is asking. Okay, so what is the deployment architecture we're talking about, etc., and what components we're talking about. And you should know also the dependencies. For instance, for those of you who are familiar with OpenShift, you know that recent versions of OpenShift work with operators in order to deploy packages, to deploy automatically applications, let's say. Okay, so if you're familiar with Kubernetes, you know something about Helm and how Helm packages applications in order to deploy them on top of an Kubernetes-based cluster, which is the case for Red Hat. So you can for sure deploy applications through Helm, but in OpenShift, everything is now an operator, and Cloud Paks are deployed as operators, or at least CP4 MCM is deployed as operator. So an operator is a kind of packaging tool which brings a bunch of services or a bunch of tools together. You should know the most common used operators which are used in order to deploy Cloud Pak for multi-cloud management. Okay, you should go through this list. You should know that they belong to namespaces, and namespace is something which is a project in OpenShift. Okay, so when we talk about namespaces in Kubernetes, it's equal project in OpenShift. So they have their own dependencies and they have their own namespaces. So you should know that, for instance, I don't know, IBM licensing operator has some dependencies or does not have, etc., etc. So you should go through this list. Okay. Also, when you were talking about installation, keep in mind that you should know, this is a must know, what are the minimum configuration requirements, for instance, how many master nodes, how many worker nodes, what CPUs you should, how many CPUs you should have, or how much memory you should have. You should also know that what target platform OpenShift should run on for the versions we're talking about, 4.5, 4.6. What are the supported hub and managed cluster cloud providers? For instance, OpenShift on AWS, on IBM Cloud, etc., etc. You should know this list, and you should know which are the profiles that you're able to provision when you try to install the OpenShift in order to then install Cloud Pak for multi-cloud management on top of that. So you have got 3 profiles, large, medium, small, and each of them has their own descriptions. So you should know this. Oops, sorry. You better look at this schema which is provided, the types of installation. So basically you have 2 types of installation. One is connected to the cloud, one is disconnected or air-gapped. You should go through that, okay? And get familiar with this task, you know, password advantage, planning your cluster, preparing installation, upgrade. So when we talk about installation, we talk about also upgrades, because you could be asked about what if you wanted to upgrade from version 2, version 2.1 to 2.2, and what are the configuration tasks that you should execute once you do the installation, and what you should do once the installation is done. And on top of configuration, you should also execute some post-installation tasks, okay? So basically you have what we call a day 1 and day 2 installation. So this term does not come from IBM. It is an IT term. So day 2 operation is what is all the post-installation and configuration in after a lapse of time when your installation is done and finished successfully. So you have 2 type of information to look at, day 1 installations and day 2 installation. And then in day 1 installation, you have simple installation and advanced installation. You've got links. You can go to those documentation, and you should know what parameters, for instance, are used in advanced installation for the customization. Okay, so there are parameters to put in YAML files. Take a look at that. For example, if we talk about advanced installation, you should know that how to mirror a registry or how to verify the installation was successful by verifying stuff. And this is the stuff that you should verify. When you go to documents and you see tasks which are to be executed, you have the required user type or access level. So this is important. Each time you study something, verify that you understood what are the required access levels. Okay, so this is something which is important for every and each of the tasks. Okay. Then when you do the installation, you have the possibility to enable or disable services which come with the Cloud Pack. So maybe you don't want to use everything, but I put some examples of what could be enabled and disabled and which are the most common enabling and disabling services that you might face when you do the installation. So study this page, and I will say study this page for all the 140 slides, so don't be shocked. And then you might be asked about installation on command line, and so you should get familiar with how you can install the infrastructure through the command line only. And for instance, how do you execute commands on command lines if you on a command line when you want to do installation. So something like this, for instance, it could be a possible thing to consider. So you should study also the upgrading from version so it's not 2.2x from a, let's say, to 1x or 2.0x, etc. So you've got the same for the installation. You have got the online upgrade option and offline upgrade option. So online upgrade could be you have different options in order to do this online and offline upgrade. So look at this. Look at these links. There are some useful tips. For instance, you should look at in which order and steps you will install Cloud Pack in connected and not connected mode. You must also know how to configure high availability for common services, which is because this is important. For instance, for configuring high availability, you need to provide high availability at least for 3 components: the IAM, the management ingress, and the platform API. So it's something important to know. And then you have got some installation checklist. And for instance, for a simple installation checklist, this is the list provided here. So go through this information and also pay attention to required OS details. And you should know that the control plane should be installed, for instance, on Red Hat Enterprise Core OS. Then you've got some verifications in order to watch and verify these elements in order to verify that your installation has been done successfully. The same for an offline installation, because you can provision your own private registry, because everything, don't forget that everything is container based. So when we say container, it means that we have a registry where these containers are registered and we use that registry. So there are information to look at and to watch when we are doing an air-gapped installation, and you should be knowledgeable of this information. For instance, the minimum disk space required, etc., etc. Also, the common service sizing, you should take a look at, for instance, what would be the sizing in order to make a custom small common services environment setting. Read also what is required for, so you remember I talked about core MCM and RACM, so you should also understand how to install RACM in both connected and air-gapped modes. You can install CP4 MCM, disable core MCM and use RACM, or vice versa. So this is important to know. There are automation tools. So Ansible, you know that it's we have two famous tools for automation in IT world, for infrastructure automation and application automation. So Terraform and Ansible, and both are proposed and used in Cloud Pak for Multicloud Manager. Get familiar with planning and installation of Ansible Tower, which comes on top of Cloud Pak for Multicloud Management. Okay, so keep in mind that you can have some tips like, for instance, when you install the Ansible Tower, if you want your users to be able to access to Ansible Tower through your CP4 MCM menu, you have to execute a command. And so that command is a menu activation, and you should do, for instance, a change mode action for that batch to run, and then you execute it in order to make this navigation visible to your end users. Also, keep in mind that, for instance, sometimes when you do the uninstallation, not all components would disappear, so you might need to force uninstallation of components. You need to run a script, and there you go with the script, which is written in bold here. You should study these tips also. It could be interesting for you to do all this. Other tips, you could be confronted with maybe questions that would ask, you want to do this or that type of installation, and you have a list of tasks which are not in order, and you should put them in order. So it's important to know in which order you should accomplish those tasks. Okay, I provided two as example. Go through them and study them. And again, other tips such as post-configuration tasks after installation, etc. Then we go to configuration, and for the configuration you have different type of configurations to achieve. For instance, on infrastructure management component. So infrastructure management component is the one that gives you the capacity to use, for instance, Terraform, etc., among others. So look at what components are needed and what are the operators, etc. Also, for instance, if you're familiar with these tasks, you know that you need to connect to external MongoDB, and in order to connect to an external MongoDB, you have to enable some features. So this is important to, when you go through the documentation, look at all these little and hidden information. It could be valuable during the exam. Again, enabling, disabling components, the most important components, you should be aware of how to enable and disable components through either YAML files or other, let's say, features. For instance, the YAML file, in order to enable or disable the CAM VPN provider, is provided here as an example. Okay, so this is not the only one that you should learn, but this is an example. And again, for instance, if you want to enable the IBM Cloud Orchestrator, you should search this parameter cam icon provider in a YAML file and put the replica count to 1. So there's a one replica of that. So you're enabling one replica count of that specific pod, and so you should know that. Again, if you want to access managed services by using a custom URL, these are the type of information, sort of information that you should be aware of. How do you do that? So you better look at the documentation on that also. And one important module in Cloud Platform Cloud Management is the cloud native monitoring. I have provided links to this particular section, so don't hesitate to spend some time and look at the documentation here. Also, although CP4MCM is really oriented cloud native, virtual machine, cluster-based monitoring, but you can also configure it to monitor non-cloud agents. So maybe you better look at how agents and data collectors work and what are they aimed for and what do they do. For instance, data collectors or data providers, what do they do? What are they used for? It's good to know what do they do and what data you can gather and how do you manage that data which is gathered, okay? So DEM is a component which provides capability to monitor real-time user experience. It's really it's used in cloud native monitoring, so you should know what it is, what does it do, and for instance, you should know that a Docker registry that can hold multi-architecture images is needed to deploy the cloud native monitoring. So these are the kind of stuff that you should look at, okay? And also, their CP4MCM let you integrate third-party tools. Okay, so it's and when we talk about third-party tools, one was acquired recently, which was Turbonomic, which was acquired recently by IBM. We bought the company, so it would be a part of CP4MCM or Watson AIOps later on. But right now, it's in this version, it's considered as a third-party integration, as well as, for instance, Sysdig. So go through that documentation, look how you can enable them, look how you can make an SSO single sign-on between CP4MCM and these third-party solutions. Okay, so this is a schema of what we call third-party solutions and what we integrate inside CP4MCM. So we've got Sysdig, Hazelcast, Turbonomic, Humio, and for different purposes, infrastructure optimization, in-memory compute, Kubernetes security, log aggregation, etc. For instance, this is the third-party configuration for Sysdig. It's important to know all this, okay? And this, if you click on this page, you go to the knowledge center where you have the information. Turbonomic, again, you should know, for instance, I don't know, for instance, you should know that you should untar a package and then you should install that. Okay, so this is important information. Security, understand authentication, LDAP, SAML, and on top of that, OpenShift authentication. You should go through all that. You should know that which type of authentications are supported and how you can, for instance, configure the single sign-on. You have different authentication types, and you can set a preferred login option, which is brought here as an example. So if you want to set a preferred login option among all which are available, you can do that, and you have some manipulations to do. So there are some So IAM, identity and access management, is a very vast subject. Get familiar with these, at least the family of commands, everything which is cloud control, cloudctl, IAM, and some important ones, which are, for instance, service create, service ID create, service ID update, etc. And also how to bring or how to put in place single sign-on between between CP4MCM and other components, and how to provide an authentication URL in order so that people, when click on that URL, they get authenticated. Again, slide on configuring SSO, single sign-on. So you've got some tasks and commands, and you can enable SAML, and which are described here. Again, managing the identity and access, you have menus, submenus, go through them. For instance, if you want to add users to a team, etc., etc., and it's important again to know who can do this task in order to, for instance, enable who can add a user to a team, for instance. Okay, so cluster administrator or team administrator access level is required in order to add a user to a team. Regarding the LDAP connection, you should know, well, I guess you know what LDAP is. You should know the supported LDAP directories. And for instance, how the authentication information is used, the base DN, the bind DN, etc. Then you've got the security regarding the namespaces. Okay, so sorry. So this information is useful to know. And again, regarding the service management, what commands help you create service IDs and delete service IDs, for instance, okay? When creating service IDs and API keys using cloud control, cloudctl. So cloud control or cloudctl, it's a command line based tool. It's like kube control, or if you have used OpenShift, it's like OC or Docker CLI. So it's a CLI, which is really related to Cloud Pak for multi-cloud management. So, and this CLI has a syntax, and it goes with other commands that you should study. Okay, so some examples are provided here. For instance, creating a service ID, creating an API key, etc. IAM integration with OpenShift. So you should integrate with your product OIDC provider, OpenID connection. LDAP integration, you should know about user groups, token, etc. So I think that the information provided here is good to look at. And regarding the rollback authorization, which is something very related to Kubernetes resources, related to custom resource definition, there's a list of airbags for custom resource definitions, which is provided here. The link is enabled to go to the web page and look at the information. I made an abstract here. I guess this is good to look at, and you can go to the web page in order to look at the full documentation. For instance, regarding the OpenID connection, OpenID Connect to IDC, or how we call it, you should have the OC command tool and Cloud Control, cloudctl command line tool in order to be able to achieve that configuration, those configuration steps. And again, when you enable YDC for infrastructure management, look at the operators which are mentioned and what is, for instance, the URL format in order to do some tasks. And what you should do, for instance, OC create, you should create a particular namespace, and you should do some configuration which are provided here. Again, in order to onboarding SSO, you need to, for instance, if you want to customize your IDC provider, you've got a command to execute. This one is something to keep in mind. Okay. And so that's it. Now, regarding common services as it might be, you can understand from the name, these are common services which are common to all the infrastructure. There are a number of them. You should get familiar with them and what is required to administrate them. For instance, common services, what are the supported platforms? What are the hardware requirements? What is the deployment model? And if ever persistent storage is needed or not. Then in the common services, you've got different parts, for instance, the common web UI. And in common web UI, you have, for instance, you have a procedure that you should execute in order to view and edit your navigation configuration for custom resources. So this is something good to know. You have also the license services, which is which you should know. You should know you should know to describe the license service capability, how you can retrieve license usage data per cluster, license usage for multiple clusters, and how to track license usage in a multi-cluster environment. So the schema is provided here, and you can, I guess the link to the page is provided in the note foots of the same page. So, for instance, when you want to interact with the license service usage data, you should obtain an API token, and the let's say, for instance, obtaining an API token on different platforms such as Linux, macOS, and Windows command lines are provided here. Now, this time it's not OC, it's not callctl, it's kubectl. So you should don't be shocked if you see different source of command line interfaces to be used. That's the way it is. Okay, it depends what is the component, how it works, and where it resides. Metering services, for instance, it provides usage metrics, okay, about applications and clusters. But if you want to configure that on a hub cluster, you need to do something with OpenShift command line. And if you want to adjust the metering, you probably need to add more resources to your cluster to support those additional scalings, and the documentation is provided here. Also are provided toolings in order to do the system health check. So, for instance, regarding usage of Prometheus, you have you can enable Prometheus, which comes by default with CP4MCM, and in order to, for instance, accessing the monitoring dashboard, you should know where to go, which menu, and what is the alternative URL if you want to access that component in order to see the metering metrics of the infrastructure you're watching or you're managing. So, for instance, in order to obtain the cluster service status, you have to be at least having access as an operator level at least, and for instance, you should do this on command line OC get cluster service status in order to obtain the required information. Again, regarding the platform monitoring, you should be knowledgeable about installing monitoring services. What are the prerequisites? And for instance, when you want to use Prometheus and Alert Manager, what type of storage class might be needed or is needed. One interesting thing is that, you know, we do use lots of secrets, passwords, etc. in all these components. You should know how they're formatted, what characters are accepted, what is not accepted, what is the format, etc. And you should know how to manage, for instance, those passwords with what type of commands you can manage these passwords and secrets. So this is a good thing to know. You need to know what type of command line control would help you to get what you want to. There are some common IAM features. Study carefully these topics. Cluster configuration, IAM APIs, and foundational service IAM guide. Go through these links. I think, for instance, it's good to know a hot topic is how to customize the authentication URL. So this is something which you should know as an admin. What is the format? What is the port number, etc., etc. High availability for IAM, we saw that at the beginning of this presentation. How to configure it, for instance. So this is the guide to configuration of high availability for IAM. You have got some OC commands type, and then you have some instructions in order to do also actions through the user interface, and you should get familiar with this. Product overview and cluster management. So it's about what is cloud native workloads, the container environments that you're going to manage, Red Hat OpenShift and other type of container native workloads. So keep in mind how it works, this cluster management. Now we're talking precisely and only about clusters. So MCM, core MCM, or RACM, how it works. You have a dashboard which is provided at the right top side of the screen, which gives you an overview of your managed cluster, either locally or on top of any cloud. And when I say any cloud, I mean IBM, Azure, AWS, okay, any supported Kubernetes-based workload. So actually, it's quite simple. You generate a command on your MCM dashboard. You execute it against your target cluster, which at the end of the day would install just sort of agent on the target cluster, and then they will communicate together. So this is the schema. So the magic is that you install a very tiny small component on the target cluster, and then that sends you information to your dashboard. So when you have this in mind, you know how the magic operates and how MCM core can get and fetch information from the target managed clusters, okay?
Should we understand that there is no agent for Power VC and vCenter? Due to the fact that there is no red ball, or?
No, it means that you can manage clusters which are on these platforms.
Okay.
No, it's just something we did it by hand, so it's not 100% accurate. It's just to give you an overall schema of how it works, how it operates.
Okay.
So, for instance, infrastructure management and managed services, you know, with managed services, you can provision cloud infrastructure, okay? And you can manage multiple cloud environments. Okay, so that's why what we call the from a single user point of view experience. So as I mentioned, you have MCM console and RACM, which are separate. And normally you use one of them, not both of them. You can use both of them, I would think. I haven't seen the case yet, but it's either one or another, and you can enable and disable these components. So with MCM core, which is in CP4 MCM, you cannot create clusters on the target environments. You can just see them, manage them, deploy applications on top of them, etc., but you cannot create one. However, with RACM, the component which is provided in to Red Hat, with RACM, you have the possibility to also create a cluster on a target environment. So this is something to keep in mind, okay? In the multi-cluster architecture terminology, you should understand what is a hub cluster, what is the managed cluster, what are the application and hybrid application resources, and what is GRC, governance and risk. And you have a console where you can manage and do automation tasks against the clusters that you manage, okay? For instance, in order to import and manage a target cluster, at least you should be cluster administrator, and you can and you should know how to import an existing cluster with the console, with the CLI, and modifying the cluster-led add-ons settings for your cluster. Okay, and you should also know what are the prerequisites for importing. For instance, if you want to use RACM, what are the prerequisites? How do you import and how do you remove a cluster from your dashboard? What we call hybrid apps is a very nice feature which is inside this cloud pack for multi-cloud management. What you see here as an image is a hybrid application. As you see, you've got your application which you can deploy on clusters. The the green circles are the clusters. And at the end, at the bottom line, you see what you see as kind of a square, 3D square are the pods which are running. So what is nice is that through the YAML file that you see here, or through this graphical user interface, you can change the target cluster of an application. You can remove an application from a cluster. You can deploy an application to a cluster. You can deploy an application to a virtual machine. You can manage the number of replica sets. You can do lots of things through this graphical user interface. If you have never done it, this is somewhere to look in the documentation in order to figure out how it's done. And when you want to manage hybrid applications, you should get familiar with some notions such as deployable core hybrid app and the channels and the subscriptions and the placement rules. Okay, so I would think that it's obvious what is a channel, what is a subscription, and what is a placement rule, and how you can play with them. But the documentation is really nice. Go and look at the documentation in the Knowledge Center, but get familiar with these notions that I provide here. Also monitoring components which are provided. You've got cloud native monitoring, and then you've got data collectors. And you have the unified agent, which is a solution to gather information about the platforms that you monitor. Okay, so a list of submenus are provided here. Take a look at them, but also read what is a cloud native monitoring, etc. And then it comes to tools and APIs and troubleshooting. So I guess these one which are in yellow are some important ones that you should go through. I think these are very important ones, so you can go and look at what they do, or at least keep in mind what are the APIs and that are how APIs can be used. For instance, the IAM APIs, the IDC APIs, etc. Again, with tools and APIs, for instance, as an example, if you go to the documentation, you can figure out that, for instance, in order to add user to an account, you need to execute something like this. So it's a curl command. And so you've got some constraints which goes with the execution of, the parameters you should set in this command. So it's good to, when you go to the documentation, be careful about what you read. MCM core and RACM, when you want to manipulate these components, hardware architecture supported is Linux x64. Okay. It means that this is the supported architecture. Required user type for access level is cluster administrator. And so this is the component that you're using. Okay, so it doesn't mean that you cannot visualize or manage platforms which are not Linux x64, but when you install the component, the underlying architecture supported is Linux x64. Okay, and you know that when you Red Hat OpenShift runs on the Core OS Linux operating system. Okay, so you know that. And Core OS, which is delivered with Red Hat OpenShift, is an immutable operating system. It means that you cannot upgrade the operating system from the bottom. If you want to upgrade the operating system, you should go through the OpenShift cluster. In that case, Red Hat is sure that you will not break anything on the operating system, and the operating system and the cluster services are always working together correctly. So this is something important to know as well, if you don't know it. So prereqs for MCM core and RACM is that you must have an IBM Cloud Pak for multi-cloud management hub deployed. You need to install Kubernetes CLI, which is the kube control, and you need also to have an IBM Cloud API key, and you should also know that to create cluster across cloud providers with OpenShift, you should run the following command. Now, for importing a cluster with IBM Cloud Console, you need to have the CP4MCM deployed, the hub cluster deployed. You sure need to have a cluster that you want to manage, otherwise it's not, it's nonsense. And the supported architectures are Linux x64, Linux on Power, and Linux on IBM Z, and IBM and Linux One. If you want to, you can do it both ways. You can do it through the console and through the CLI. If you want to use the CLI, you should also read the documentation, and you should know, even if you don't want to do it, you should read the documentation. And one important thing is that you cannot, so the hub cluster is, when we say hub cluster, is the place that you've installed your MCM. You cannot import the same hub cluster inside your, as a managed cluster. It's the mother of everything, so you cannot import it and treat it as a child. You'll also, you can also import clusters with IBM Cloud Pak from air-gapped platforms. And you need to do some manipulations in order to be able to do that. This is the list of things that you need to do. And you have access to the documentation as well. These are URLs. But the list is provided here. Also, in order to scale clusters and remove clusters, either through the GUI or the CLI, you can do it. On the CLI, you've got these two command lines in order to execute and achieve what you want to achieve. So when it comes to cluster monitoring, you have a dashboard to monitor your cluster. There's a link in order to give you some examples. You have also other ways to access and monitor your cluster, through other tools such as Grafana, Alert Manager, Prometheus, etc. And the metrics which are provided out of the box are those provided here. Okay. So this is important to know what metrics are provided out of the box, and you can access monitoring services API and Grafana again, but you must obtain authentication keys in order to be able to do what you want to do. You can also do some customization on your monitoring. Everything is provided here, but you can also refer to the links to go to the documentation to see more detailed information. Keep in mind that the metering services take up only to 24 hours, take up to 24 hours before starting reporting when you manage an environment. For instance, if you add a new cluster, it takes up to 24 hours. Before that, you can see the monitoring information. And you can also use Cloud Control to play with metering information. 3 major commands which are provided here. It's nice to look at them. Also, when you want to do some discovery, configuration discovery, you have you should enable Kubernetes ingress discovery, and these are the steps. For instance, if you want to enable this feature, go through them. And enabling an Istio service discovery also is described here. There's a link to the page. Go to the page. So creating and managing clusters with RACM, you've got the list of the providers which are supported, such as AWS, Azure, Google GCP, bare metal machines, bare metal cluster-based application servers. Sorry. If you want to create a cluster with RACM, these are again the supported platforms. And go and take a look at how you import a cluster with the console, the graphical console with the CLI, and modifying the add-ons settings for the cluster. Hybrid application lifecycle management, that's the image I showed you earlier, the graphical image I showed you. I told you that it's a very nice feature. You can manage easily applications through on top of different platforms. There are some, so these applications are using and made of composed and multiple resources. So you've got, you can also manage non-Kubernetes systems in your dashboard to manage, and you should go through this documentation in order to figure how it works and what are the components which are used and what are they used for. With the application management console, you can automatically discover application resources and assemble together. So this is some very nice feature to be knowledgeable of. You've got links to the documentation. Still in the discovering and assembling, you've got documentation to go and discover and figure out how it works. How many phases and what are the phases, for instance, discovery and then assembly, etc. You can go and look at the documentation. And this page describes the application resources which are managed and which are implemented and managed inside the CP4 MCM. It continues, again, deploying application resources. For instance, if you're not, maybe there's a lot of stuff to learn, but keep in mind that there are some important notions to keep in mind. For instance, within the hybrid application model, you use deployables. So if you know what a deployable is, it's good. Otherwise, study it. And the deployables are to wrap or represent application components for deployments. So this is kind of reference to point you to the information. You can look at it. And what is important is that you take a good look at this page and understand what are channels, what are subscriptions, what are the placement rules, and what are the applications. Okay, so it doesn't mean that you need to learn them by heart, but it's good to know what we're talking about. Then for each section, you've got troubleshooting. For instance, imagine that you manage clusters, etc. And when you try to import a cluster, there's a message error message, image pull back off. And why does it happen? You should know that the cause might be that your target managed cluster fails to pull the Docker image simply. And how to resolve the problem. So to resolve the issue, you've got to execute some command lines on the with the CLI. So these commands are provided here. Monitoring 13% of your success nodes. When you want to monitor accesses, events, roles, thresholds, and whatever you want to monitor, you should have some particular access level, and there are some roles which are associated to monitoring tasks: operations lead, operations engineer, operator. And then these are all, let's say, mapped with some IAM role mappings. So, for instance, operational lead might be a cluster administrator, account administrator, or administrator. So keep this picture in mind. Then, for instance, what you see when you look at the thresholds, okay, thresholds, limits, what do you see? And what is provided to you as parameter, and what is the information that you gather? This is all what is provided here. You can use REST APIs in order to do monitoring. You should know that if you want to use REST APIs with LDAP setup and LDAP onboarding, you need to keep this information in mind. Also, there's a component, Netcool Omnibus, which is provided in order to do monitoring. You should know where to find this monitoring dashboard, how it's integrated, and how do you configure it, okay? Also, it is you have the capacity to send incidents, sending incidents to alert notifications, and in configure netcool omnibus to manage these incident management, and also ServiceNow, and also you can integrate incident details to Microsoft Teams. To this is all we call the chat ops, you know, so chat ops and what is provided in order to be able to collaborate around incident alert receiving to incident resolution. When we talk about monitoring, there are actions that you can take against incidents with policies or without policies. So you can, for instance, when you receive events, you can enrich them, you can suppress them, you can assign to runbooks, etc., etc. Get familiar with this list of actions that you can take against events. The same for managing the incident policies. And this is the schema of how the incidents are shown and provided, and how you can manage them. So you have a view of your incidents, of the group incidents, and all incidents. SLO, managing SLO, service level objectives, it's also possible. What it gives to you, performance, reliability, quality, and where it is accessible and how you can see it. You can manage thresholds. So thresholds are limits, and you can have permissions to manage. So this is the graphical user interface again, and this is how you can manage and define your thresholds. Also managing metering, and we saw data providers. The link is provided here. You can have access to metric collections, and you can either enable or disable them, the metric collection agents. And also observability in RACM, so that this is important tips. There's some important tips to know. For instance, the observability service does not support the storage of data that is older than 1 hour. And how it is, for instance, if you want to enable more time frame in order to information to be displayed, you've got a parameter to set. So this is some interesting information, I guess, that you should look at. Creating baselines. So it's creating baseline and configure events to trigger when anomalies are detected. So this is also some good information to look at. So GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. So you should understand what are the security services, how you configure and deploy policies, and you have also two other tools, set of tools, which is mutation advisor, vulnerability advisor, and license advisor. Okay. So it all is provided in a dashboard. It's very interesting, a very interesting feature, and you can do lots of. It gives you the capacity to manage, as I mentioned at the beginning, risk and compliance policies for the entire environments that you are managing. Okay, so you can apply a specific policy to all the environments. And so if, for instance, a policy does not exist, if a rule does not exist, it could be either created or alert you so that this is something, there's something missing on the platform. on your environment. Or it could be targeted for a set of infrastructure that you're managing. And so this is quite a very important information when you implement Cloud Pak for multi-cloud management. So Mutation Advisor is a tool that provides real-time integrity protection for containers running on your clusters. And you can enable it, and it's better that you enable it because it's a very nice feature. It uses a sysdig Falco data collector, and you've got the Mutation Advisor Advanced and Mutation Advisor, which work a bit differently. You can create and define rules, for instance, filters, and if on Mutation Advisor Advanced, and the filter is used to define or ignore a pattern which are collected through the tool, which crawls your environment. And for instance, you can do whitelists in order to ignore a pattern which you define or patterns that you define when the mutation and alerts are gathered. So when you want to enable this feature against container-based platforms, you can, it supports different type of registries which are provided here. So depending on the version of the Cloud Pak you use, if it's 1.3 or earlier, it's Docker Hub, Artifactory, ICP, which is IBM Cloud Private, Harbor, and OpenShift. If you're using a version 2 or higher, it's Docker Hub, Artifactory, ICP, Harbor, OpenShift, and Nexus. The container runtimes which are supported are Docker and CRI-O, because by default OpenShift uses the CRI-O container engine, which is fully compatible with Docker. But if you have, for instance, I don't know if you have other formats of containers which might run on your platform, they are not supported. The only supported are Docker and CRI-O. And the platforms which are OpenShift platforms which are supported are 4.5 and 4.6. Okay. You have also policy controllers which enforce governance on your cluster or your virtual machine. The policy controllers are Kubernetes custom resource definition instances. For VMs, it is Ansible, which could be used in order to track compliance on top of the observed or watched platforms. So there's a list of, so what is important to know for instance, is that the support is limited to, when we talk about VMs, the support is limited to RHEL 7, okay? It's something which is related to the version. And you might consider that custom policies which could be created in both govern risk dashboard or in RACM are certificate policy, configuration policy, and IAM policy. You can also make custom policies which require an additional installation setup, which is IBM Cloud Private 3.2x, and then you can manage the certificate policies, CIS policies, and secret encryption policies. So all this documentation is provided on the bottom of this page. Regarding the policies, go through the policy elements. What is policy, MCM, IBM.com standards, categories, and controls. Okay, go through these elements and study them. Mutation Advisor, you should look at how Mutation Advisor is activated and how to install it and how to enable the mutation advisor during the installation, and either during the installation or after the installation. So there are parameters to look at, and these links are provided. Another feature is the license advisor. I guess we saw this picture before as well, because it's sometimes there are overlaps. So license advisor, as it might be, I mean, it's straightforward definition. It monitors the licenses usage of the IBM products. It's good to know if you or your customers are compliant. So this is what it does. It supports specific operating system. It's installed in IBM Common Services, and in short, it aggregates license usage data from multiple clusters. So that's what it does. ILMT is used to access the license usage in non-containerized environment. So it's good to know what the name is or what it does. Okay, and then you can go to the documentation and see in details what it does. You've got also system health check services, which is basically a REST API, which provides status of your nodes using Kubernetes API server. Okay, so it gives you the unhealthy pods and the etc. etc. So this, for instance, if you want to see on top of your managed clusters, how can you have the health check providing you some information? You run, for instance, this command kubectl, kubectl, get resource views, etc. And in the IBM common name services namespace, and it's important to look at this information. So infrastructure management services. So infrastructure management services, it's basically Terraform. Okay, it's Terraform and Ansible. What is automation? It was used to it was CloudForms before. Okay, and CloudForms was a Red Hat product. So not really this way, but IBM gave MCM core to Red Hat, and Red Hat gave CloudForms to IBM, and it changed its name and it became Infrastructure Management Service. So basically, if you hear IMS or Infrastructure Management Service, it's CloudForms. And if you're familiar with CloudForms, it's good. If you're not familiar, documentation is provided hereafter. So this gives you the capacity to discover, control, automate, and integrate systems together. And in order to deliver IAC, I mean infrastructure as code capacities, which basically is Terraform, and Terraform is the open source language which comes from HashiCorp, which is used in order to make automation to provision infrastructure widely used on all cloud providers by all cloud engineers. So this is the overall schema of the architecture of the service with the server roles, which you need to enable to collect operating system, virtual hardware, and application information for virtual machines in order to manage them. So keep this image in mind. Inside, control, automate, integrate. Okay. There's also, as I mentioned, it's meant to be CP4MCM brings the capacity of collaboratively manage environments. And so when we say collaboratively, it means that we integrate with other third-party tools, such as, for instance, Slack, and now with the Watson IOPS newer version, also into Teams. And basically we enable chat ops with these toolings, with Slack or with Teams. And chat ops is a chapter, and you should study this chapter in order to see what chat ops, how it works and what it brings. And get familiar, for instance, with these syntaxes such as Hobbit name, help, find, PD, etc., and how to retrieve incidents through the chat ops. Okay. Also, look at how to update chat ops integration setting by modifying which config map settings. It's documented. Oh, it's not a hyperlink, so oops. Let's make it a hyperlink. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so get familiar with this, although it's good to have this list in mind. Also, in order to be able to manage and assign and view incidents, you should have one of these roles, which are described here in bold. Okay. You can also do things such as onboarding, offboarding virtual machines or Kubernetes nodes, etc. Open SSH over HTTPS session to virtual machines. So this is something to know. This is something good to know. Okay. Again, accessing terminal sessions, which gives the capacity to replay sessions on IBM Cloud Pak. So you can see what happened, how the incident happened, etc. And for that, you need to be either cluster administrator, either team administrator, or account administrator. So go through the tips and regarding the monitoring, alerts, and reporting, and see all this information which is provided in bold. This is a screen capture of the knowledge center. So go to this file. It's interesting. Again, some more tips. You can also take a look at chargeback rate attributes. So chargeback is when you manage infrastructure, you can charge back the fees to either your customers or your internal departments. So this is again a very good feature which is implemented in MCM, in CP4 MCM, and you can have a look at what is possible and what are the let's say attributes and information like that. Also, last but not least, you should know how to troubleshoot installation or upgrades. Okay, so it's there are a lot of information, but focus on what is important. For instance, frequently encountered installation or uninstallation or upgrade errors are listed here. And there's some, for instance, if you want to gather information about your common service installation, what you should do. If you want to show upgrade pending status, what you should do. If an operand is not deployed, what you should do, etc. So this list, I guess, is very important and interesting to look at. And for instance, these three examples are nice examples, I would say. Among the troubleshooting tasks that you should know that troubleshooting may include all these tasks, for instance. Okay, how to troubleshoot them. And what are the, for instance, if you're troubleshooting clusters and you see, for instance, a cluster import is failing, what you should do, for instance, you should verify that the kube control version which is installed is the right version, or if you want to manually delete a namespace which fails to be deleted, you should probably do this. If you have a webhook that fails to when deploying an application, you should redeploy the image security enforcement to an approved namespace, and so forth and so on and so forth. So for instance, oops, if you want to do some Rackham troubleshooting and you have a use case which is provided here, you should probably need to delete the managed cluster with the cluster name, etc. So also get familiar with troubleshooting of the Cloud Pak components. For instance, for troubleshooting the application management component, this is the command line, troubleshooting certificate manager, troubleshooting chat ops, IAM issues, etc. Okay. And then the troubleshooting for monitoring part, it's again, some very common cases are provided here. Take a look at them. Okay. And then you should know also how to, for instance, if you use the CLI, what are the family of CLI commands that you should use when you do debugging for MCM, core MCM, or Rackham, for instance. Cloud control, MC, is managed cluster MC commands. And then you've got also other plugins which are provided here. And for instance, take a look at service API key management commands, which are interesting. Again, debugging, again, core MCM and Rackham. It's basically, it uses tools which are Kibana, Elasticsearch, and Fluentd. So it's EFK, the EFK stack. It's very standard. It's very straightforward. And if you want to manage logs, there's a link provided here. You have a screen capture. How, for instance, you can manage the logs which are provided by EFK stack. Okay. Also, troubleshooting user interface UI elements for Cloud Automation Manager. You should use Mozilla Firefox. It's the way it is. And you should examine the following logs, which are provided in bold here. There's a specific URL, and IE is not supported. And thanks to God, Microsoft will stop the support of Internet Explorer as well. There are also some other stuff good to know. Look at what could be unusual. For instance, if you have a namespace which is not terminating, go and take a look at why and how to resolve the problem. So, and again, be careful when you read the documentation. I talked about different type of CLIs, kube control, cloud control, OC. So note that many of the cloud control cluster management commands look like kube control commands, which are similar in most cases, but the main difference is that cloud control applies to a multi-cluster environment, whereas kube control is targeting only the current namespace of the current cluster. Okay, so this is doing something against multiple cluster versus doing something against a or one cluster. I hope that you're still alive. I'm going to go through a sample sets of questions. It's not very long. You're going to go through it together, and you're going to have this deck as well. So we will try to go through these questions, and you can participate. And even if you don't know, take a chance and tell me what the question might be. And we'll go through the correction as well. Okay. So, for instance, which questions 1 and 2, which two of the following registry types are supported in Vulnerability Advisor? D. Question, yes. So what you say? D. D, AWS and ECR, okay. And what is the Bastion host used for an air-gapped installation or upgrade of Cloud Pak for multi-cloud management? What is the platform supported?
B.
D.
B.
Oh, B.
Huh?
B. Okay, Linux x86. So the first question, you were wrong. So it's so it's not AWS and ECR. We are talking about the registries against which we can execute vulnerability advisor. So it's if we are talking about version 2.x, which is the target, it's Docker Hub, Artifactory, ICP, Harbor, OpenShift, and Nexus. For the second question, you were right. We should prepare a Bastion host, which is x86, Linux 886, and use that as the host, as the Bastion for the air-gapped installation. Questions 3 and 4. Which pods must be restarted to activate authentication method changes in CP4MCM? Even I don't know.
D.
Okay, out IDP and out PDP. Okay, let's see. Which two components can be used to manage cluster using CP4MCM? So remember RACM MCM core? The question is two components.
The A and the D.
Yes, I think so. So the first one was, you were wrong.
I was thinking also the GUI.
So the fact is that all of these answers look alike. So you've got auth IDP, and then you have the rest. So yeah, it was a good shot. Bad luck.
You're right.
And then the second one, you were absolutely right. It's A and D.
Okay. Second one are for Stefan.
Yes. So what mechanism is provided by CP4MCM to collect diagnostic information for managed services? So what mechanism should I do an OC logs, namespace management, etc.? Should I execute a CAM collector SH? Should I do OC exec CAM login, cloud control log collect, etc.?
I think D.
D, okay, cloud control log collect, okay. And which command is used to establish single sign-on for a partner solution using CP4MCM through OIDC? Is it cloud control create a file, create something by using a YAML file? Is it OC edit, auth cluster, cloud control YAM, IAM, or OC create secret generic?
I think C.
Okay. So for the first question, it's so when you see something to do, something which is weird, go for the weird answer. That's my that's my recommendation, because you have never seen the CAM collector, and it's very odd that some OC command would make you obtain some diagnostic information. And for the other one is, I don't know which answer you said.
I said C.
Okay, so cloud control, IAM, yeah, this is the good one. So resources in which namespace should be reviewed to troubleshoot issues related to CP4MCM services? Is it OpenShift infrastructure, is it IBM managed infrastructure, is it Terraform managed, or is it management infrastructure management? So namespace, remember namespace.
I think B.
B, okay. IBM managed infrastructure. So, and if a pod dies with an OM137 message, what is the possible resolution? Should you run the optimization wizard? Should you add TLS certificate to the route? Should you recreate the Docker registry, or should you increase memory available to the pod?
D.
Yeah, I would say so. because it's a pod which is dying. Okay, so let us check. So for the first one, it's management, infrastructure management. Okay, so management repeated twice. That's a hint. And for the second question, yeah, you were right. It's a problem of memory. So if a pod dies, you should increase memory. That's logic. After the installation of managed services, Ansible Tower integration could be enabled or disabled by changing which CAM Ansible provider parameter.
The replica count, eh?
Yeah, I think so. And which governance and risk compliance policy control, monitor memory, and CPU allocation, storage, package version verification, and init process, which, so let me check the question again. Which governance and risk policy, which GRC controller monitors memory, CPU, storage, package version, etc.?
Eh?
VM resources.
Wide guess.
Yeah. So for the first one, you were right, and we saw that during the presentation. For the second one, you were right as well. It's VM Resource Policy Controller. Good. So when using the System Health Check Service API, which 3 endpoints are available?
A.
Okay. And when adding a custom event source using a webhook with JSON formatted data to Cloud Event Manager, how does the JSON payload map into required event fields? Don't be shy.
Let's.
I will guess D.
D, okay. So the first one was D, health, node status, and cluster status. So because it's the way it is endpoints. So these are the endpoints which are provided in documentation. Okay, so it's written somewhere. Either otherwise, nobody would know that. And for this, the other question, it's A. JSON payload must contain attributes name, severity, summary, event type, and resource name. So bottom line of these decks are that if you see the let's say a number of questions which are provided here. I think this was the assessment I did. I think this comes from the assessment. If I'm not, I don't know, because I did it 2 months, 3 months ago. So the assessment gives you a good overview of where you are and what is your understanding after reading the documentation, after reading this deck. So if you fail with a large gap, so you should read again this deck and the documentation. If you're successful, or you're successful with but we're a short level, you maybe try to pass the exam, but you won't see the same questions. So that's why I insist on the fact that you should go through the documentation, go through my deck. I think I provided some tips. I hope that these tips will help. But again, I succeeded the assessment, so I was very happy. I failed my first certification test, and I studied again and again, and I succeeded my second certification attempt. And I was happy, but the questions were totally different, and this is how it works. And I succeeded because I really looked at every detail that I could find in the documentation, because I figured out that they look a lot at the details It might seem not fair, but it's how the way it is. So I really insist that you look at the details. I'm going to put the we use Box inside IBM as a repository. I created a shared box, so let me check the link settings. So if you go to this, so if you see my screen still, this says allow users with the shared link to download. I'm going to put this, where is the Teams here? I put this in the chat section. So you've got access to both my decks, the questions and the presentation. And in my presentation, I provide the link to the study guide, which I talked about, which is on the official IBM certification or Pearson View, I don't remember, site. So you can go and look at them.
All right. I think it was very interesting.
I wouldn't say it's interesting. I would say it was a bit boring, but
yeah, but I think it can be very useful.
Yeah, sure. We don't need to study.
Yeah. So how do I stop sharing? Okay, I did.
Yes. Yeah.
I stopped sharing. Okay.
All right. So yeah, maybe if you can also send me the PowerPoint, etc., then I can forward.
It's a big one, so you can download it.
Or the box. Yeah, I will send the box.
Click on the box. I mean, I would like that somebody clicks on the link in order to see that.
Yeah, it's working.
So if it's working, it's okay. I deactivate the box link this Saturday, I guess. So if you better download them sooner, better than later. Otherwise, you can reach out to me. I can send you, but it's about, I don't know, how it's. Oh no, it's not that big. It's only.
Oh, it's 7 meg.
Yeah, because
7.6 megabyte.
Lots of text, so that's why it's that big. So yeah, you can. I can send them through emails if you're having problems, but I guess you can download them right now.
I have already downloaded both of them.
Okay.
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, great.
All right. Perfect.
Great.
I will stop recording.